right, so it's actually interesting that we talk about jobs today, because we're going to actually talk about employer-employee relationships in the second half of the message today. But we are going to continue with relationships. Last week, Julie talked about husband and wife relationships and what that looks like, what it's like, what it really means. She did a great job of describing what it really means for a wife to submit to their husband and for a husband to love their wife and that relationship. Well, today, Paul kind of continues it on. We start a new chapter in Ephesians, but we stay with the theme of relationships. And we're going to look at two. And the big key today, and the kind of the theme of both, is that there is somebody in a position of authority in both of these relationships. And we're going to look at who's under the authority and who's in authority. And Paul talks to both in this section, all right? So what I want us to take away today is when we look at relationships with authority, is that we should respond to authority as if we're responding to God. So respond to authority as if we're responding to God. And that goes whether you're under authority or in the position of authority, all right? So we will get to here Ephesians 6. We're going to look at 1 through 9. That's going to be on those song sheets. We're going to get there in just a minute. But the first relationship today that he discusses, kind of following off husbands and wives, is parents and children. Now, I love family relationships. I think about all the TV shows and movies that are about families. And one of my favorites, and the first one I went to, was actually the show Modern Family. Who's watched Modern Family ever? Most of us, at least a little. Yeah, I think they're just these really funny different families. They have like kind of the stereotypical, like the dad that wants to be the cool dad in Phil Dunphy, and the mom that kind of makes sure everything's going well, and kids that are all over the map. All right, but they always have like kind of these funny situations, and then at the end of the show, there's kind of this heartfelt, sentimental quote about family, and I love those. And one of them was this: making a child is the easy part. The hard part is everything that comes after. And in essence, he's talking about raising the child, and it's also hard for kids to grow up. All right, I know it's hard. It was hard to grow up when we were kids. It's different now. So raising the kid and growing up is hard, and that's what we're going to talk about first. All right, and in this situation, we have the child being under the authority of the parents, and the parents are in the position of authority. So let's look at those. We're going to look at Ephesians 6, 1 through 3 to start, and this he's going to talk to the children. So here we go. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. First thing Paul does is address the children. Now, this is actually significant because he directly speaks to them. In Paul's day, socially, there was a big hierarchical issue going on. So it was status. Kids would have been towards the bottom. So the fact that Paul talks to them directly is like, I see you guys. I know you're there. You're going to hear this. And I'm telling you, you have full participation in the community of God. You guys are a part of this. So he's going to address them. And he specifically addresses children that are living in the home and in the Lord, which means so we have kids living with their parents in the house and in a Christian home, parents that would follow God. Now, here's what he's saying. He is saying, children, obey your parents. Now, not if they're asking you to do something illegal or do something terrible, because we're in the Lord again, but he's saying obey because it's right. Obey because it's right. Now, as a kid, I would have hated hearing that. Listen to your parents. Why? Because I said so. I know we have some kids still living at home. That phrase sounds like it's terrible. But as we dig into it, why? Why would he say that? Well, if we think about how God is our Father and why we obey God, God sees things that we can't see. God understands things in a way that we can't. He has provision for us. Similar, parents are able to see things that their kids can't yet see. They have experiences. They have knowledge that kids haven't yet had. So they're doing that, and they're saying things to try to help their children. That's why you should obey. Parents can see things that maybe the kids can't yet. I thought about the awesome kids movie Finding Nemo with this, right? So we have Nemo and Marlin, the two clownfish, right? Little Nemo. Probably the stereotypical little kid that's like, I'm strong, I'm tough, I can do everything, and he's going to swim out past this ledge, and his dad, Marlin, the overprotective dad, that's what I would be. I would be Marlin being like, don't you dare go that far. But Nemo swims out, and what happens? If we know the movie, he gets scooped up, and then he ends up in the dentist office. Why? He didn't listen to his dad. Now, granted, in the movie, this has to happen because that's what gives us the movie, but he didn't listen to his dad, who was seeing things, knew it might be dangerous, and tried to pull him back in. So obedience is how children can show love to their parents and, in turn, show love to God if they haven't quite grasp, who is God or what's going on here. But it's a way that kids at a young age can show love to God by obeying their parents. Okay, so it's right to obey. Great. Does anything else happen? Kids can be wondering. Sure, it does actually. He talks about it. He says to enjoy that long life here on earth. When we teach kids and when kids learn to obey at a young age, you start to learn about what a life in the Lord is really like. Now, it's not perfect. It's not without any struggles, but it's a life of love and hope, and it plants that seed at a very early age in kids that can stick with them. And I can tell you that's a piece for me. I grew up in a very Christian home with great parents and a great family. We were in church twice on Sundays and once on Wednesday. I would not want to go back Sunday night most of the time. I even faked falling asleep in a recliner in my living room once so my parents would leave and I'd have to go. Not something I'm proud of, but we were there all the time. Right? We were always in church, but that seed was planted and it carried on. Even times as I got older, I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll go to church, maybe I won't. Well, guess what? That seed was already there, and here I am. All right? So it starts at a young age if we plant that, and it starts with kids obeying your parents. So kids responding to the authority of your parents, I think it boils down to this: love and respect. Love and respect. First, I want to talk about respect, and this one I think is really where it keys to kids that are still living with their parents in the house right now. Respect your parents. Believe they want what's best for you, even through all the times you need to roll your eyes at what they say, all the times they tell you, no, you can't extend your curfew, no, you have to be home at this time. Respect that because it is they want what's best for you, even when they say no. So it's respect there. And for adult kids, all of us in here, at one point, we were children of somebody. We still are, whether our parents are with us or not anymore. And this is a hard one, but I think this is where it comes down to loving our parents, even as adult children. Now, if you had bad experiences with parents or there were bad relationships, I'm not asking you to bring those back and get directly involved. But I do think it's a good thing to think about what does it mean to love our parents as we love Christ, for those of us not living with our parents anymore that are adults. Love parents like we love Christ. Respond to the authority that parents have as if we're responding to God, whether we're in the home or not. Respond to parents like we're responding to God. Now let's talk about the parents. Okay, so we got the kids. Kids, I got you guys out of the way right off the bat. Obey your parents, right? Parents, what's it like for those of us that are parents? Let's look at another Modern Family quote. Why not? We do strange things for the people we love, parents to kids. There may be bumps along the way, but we never stop wanting what's best for them. That's what makes it such a tough job, but the best job in the world. Being a parent, for those of you not parents, is really, really hard. All right? I have 2 kids. It's crazy hard, but it's also the best thing in the world. Kids are a lot of fun, and it's great. So it's nice that Paul gives us one whole verse about parenting, but guess what? It's a packed verse. Here's what he says, Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, now, as he writes fathers, he's talking to both fathers and mothers is how we would take that today. Fathers and mothers, let's take it that way, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Do not exasperate your children. By definition, exasperate means to irritate or frustrate intensely. I would love to someday have a cup of coffee with Paul and talk about this verse and a number of other things, but say, Paul, so I can't frustrate or irritate my kids intensely, but bro, they do that to me all the time. This week, Joella decided to wake up Wednesday morning at 4 a.m. singing the Chicka Chicka Boom Boom book. I hear at 4 a.m., Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. Here's what's cool. She went back to sleep. I didn't. Frustration level was a little high. But what Paul is getting at here, even if our kids exasperate us, he's saying to not exasperate, don't push your kids so hard that they're discouraged, that they quit. Don't be overbearing or lord authority over them like you're this huge superior person. That's what he's getting at. Not trying to turn them into what we think they should be and make them just want to quit everything. That's one side. But it also doesn't mean being a complete pushover and letting kids get everything they want. He's not saying that either. So what is it? What's that middle ground? I think it really comes down to the word discipline, because Paul writes, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. I think that's discipline. Now, I don't want us to see discipline as just punishment, because I think sometimes we use those words interchangeably. I know I've thought them, but they're not the same. Punishment can be a part of discipline, but discipline is a bigger and encompassing word. And when I look at it, I see the word disciple in the word discipline. The word disciple is there. Now, we love the word disciple in churches. I use it all the time. It's in the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What does disciple mean? Instruction, correction, rebuke when it's needed. It's helping people grow up well and mature. I've been discipled. We had our good friend Steve Cecil visited last month. He is a guy that has discipled me. He instructed me. He corrected me. And yeah, he rebuked me and called me an idiot a few times when I needed it. But that was part of the discipleship process. He probably did all those in one conversation sometimes. But it's all because he wanted me to grow up and mature well. It's the same thing with parents helping to raise your kids. It may frustrate them, but eventually I think they'll appreciate it. One of my favorite dads and kind of authority figures on another TV show would have been good old Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right, played by James Avery, passed away a few years ago. But Uncle Phil, you know, he had Will in the house, so he's his uncle, but then also 3 kids of his own, and he's, in essence, raising all of them, he and his wife. But Uncle Phil was this guy that would, like, he was awesome because he would instruct them, he corrected them, he rebuked them, sometimes he yelled, but he always had a big heart for them, right? He was just this big old teddy bear, but also this big authority figure, and they had the character balance it so well. And I think he was a good example because he just helped wanting them to grow up well, to be the best they could be. So when I think about that with parents and kids and discipling and discipline in a godly way, I think it comes down to helping kids grow to be who God wants them to be. Now, that may mean that we have to put our own ambitions for our kids second. And that's hard because I have things that I was like, oh, man, I want my kids to grow up to be like this. But what really matters is what does God want them to be? And how do we help them get there? For me, one of the hardest parts is when my kids have to go through hard things. And they're still pretty young. They haven't had to go through a lot yet. But hardships. But I have to remember that that is part of the discipline process. When we think about God as our Father again, we're disciplined. Hebrews 12:7 says, endure hardship as discipline, because God is treating you as children for what children are not disciplined by their fathers. So the hard stuff we might have to walk our kids through or have them go through is part of the discipline, part of the discipling process of our kids. So Christ-like authority and Christ-like parenting, disciple the kids. Bring them up with Christ at the center of that parent-child relationship. So parents, I talked to the kids last time, think about how do you discipline? And there is not one right way. Trust me, I get that. There are books and books about disciplining your children. If one person could write a blanket book that worked for everybody, they would be a millionaire several times over. Right? There's not one right way, but think about how you do it. Can you see it as a form of discipleship? Is it Christ-like? Is Christ at the center? Okay, so as we think about that parent-child relationship, we're all children of somebody, and we have been. And some of us are parents, some of us will be parents someday. But in any side of that relationship, we want them to be Christ-like with Christ at the center. And the authority in this relationship, whether we're under it or in it, should be Christ-like, and we should respond to it as if we're responding to Christ. Okay, so that's parent-child. All right, so we hit that one. Now we're going to look at another relationship, and this one ties back into the discussion question about employers and employees. Now, the way Paul writes this is Paul writes to slaves and masters. And I want to talk about that really quick and give some backdrop on that before we get into it. So what Paul is addressing here is Paul is addressing household slaves. And again, it's a big deal that he's actually addressing them because he's understanding they're going to hear this. He's giving them some status again. But they're slaves that lived in the house. They could actually earn some money. Many of them were eventually freed. Some actually, in turn, had slaves later on. Now, I'm not saying it was cushy or anything like that. There were still bad things. There was still abuse, especially to women and children. But it's not exactly the same as the slavery sometimes we think about in American history. So they lived in the home, all right, but they were still technically owned. Now, he's addressing the relationship between the slave and the earthly master. Some people will say, well, is this Paul saying slavery is totally cool? No, I don't think he's saying that at all. He's not addressing the issue or the institution of slavery, rather the relationship between the slave and the earthly master. So the parallel we're going to draw, and I know it's not perfect, but I think it's the one we can make the most application from, is employer to employee, like us and our bosses if we have them, because we do work for them. And it's not family, but there is an authority relationship. So please don't hear me say that your boss is like a slave owner and you're like a slave at work. It's not the same. That's not it. But we're going to take kind of what happens in that relationship, the way Paul writes to slaves and masters, and apply it to work for us. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at Ephesians 6. We're going to read 5 through 8 to learn about this. So Paul says in verse 5, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each of you for whatever good they do, whether slaves or free." So he says, slaves, obey your masters. So employees, obey your boss. Very similar to how he started it with parents and kids. Obey. Similar reason for why, because they're in a position of authority. Now, I think, I'm wondering, as you were talking about those jobs, if in your head some of you went to that boss you just couldn't stand. Who's had a boss they couldn't stand? Nobody on camera can see you. You can raise your hand. It's okay. Yeah? Okay. You know, I thought about the movie Office Space. You know, we're getting to the end of a Friday. Peter's sitting in his cubicle, and the boss comes around the corner. "Hey, Peter, what's happening? I'm going to go ahead and need you to come in tomorrow. So if you could be here around 9, that would be great." Okay? "Oh, I forgot. Going to need you to also go ahead and come in on Sunday. We lost some people this week. We need to play catch-up. Thanks." And he walks away. Now, I'm going to go ahead and guess, and knowing the movie, Peter doesn't want to respect and obey his boss in that moment. But Paul would say, obey your boss, respect and fear. And it's not a place of fear that we're worried about retribution, but rather a place of respect and honor for the position that your boss is in. Similar, we talk about fear of the Lord. Not afraid of what God necessarily will do to me, but I'm in a position of awe and respect and of submission to God. That's a very similar place. Now, why? Well, because your boss can see a bigger picture a lot of times. It may not feel like they always do, but if we hear the phrase "above your pay grade," right? Sometimes bosses will say that, or we think that. It means they're paid a little more. They might know a bigger vision for the company or what your job is supposed to get you to do. All right, so obey, listen, respect those bosses because it's right. It's what they know how to do. But then in verses 6 and 7, I think Paul really hits the biggest part of this employee piece here. So I want to look at 6 and 7 again really quick. It says, "Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people." Serve as if you were serving God and not people. Serve not just when their eye is on you. So that means you're not only working hard and doing all your work when that boss is standing over you staring at you, or when you know they're listening in on your call that you're on, or they're remote into your computer to see what you're doing. Not just then. It's all the time. Work hard when the eyes aren't on you. Now, I bet this one, for a lot of people, is getting tougher and tougher because there's so much more working from home going on, right? You're working in that home office. So are you still working when you should be? Or are we not when we're supposed to be? And I know everybody's job requirements are different, but think about that. Are you working just when your boss is watching? Or are you kind of doing your own thing? Now, I have an example of me not doing what I was supposed to do from back in the day. I worked at a budget car and truck rental way back. And I worked at a small office out in Middleton. And I had a boss for a while that honestly didn't care what we did. He really didn't care. As long as the cars and trucks went out when they were supposed to, that's all he cared. Well, he got fired. And we got a new boss. And she was a little bit more of a higher up. She cared. And this is all written down. It's in company policy. But our old boss was like, he gave you the passwords to get by the internet firewall. He didn't really care. Well, one day, and I would do the thing where I'm like, cool, this is great. I can just kind of work a few hours. I'm getting paid for like 8 or 9. I'd be sitting at the back desk, like watching something on the computer, feet up on the desk. And you could hear a door close when a customer showed up. So I'd do the thing where I'm basically falling off my chair, rushing up to the front to make sure I'm there. I had it on lockdown. It was great. Well, one day, the new boss comes in, and somehow she had to look up something on the computer and saw that we were able to get into the computer and get by the firewalls and all this. She was less than happy. Geoff lost most of his monthly bonus for that. But she was right? It was in there. I was supposed to be working all the time. I wasn't. I did not work as hard when nobody was watching as I did when people were watching. I didn't serve my job or serve my boss like I would serve God. Because as we know, God's always watching us. God sees us when we serve doing anything. And that's kind of the idea. Serve that job like we're serving God. Work in a way that God would be proud of. Take the instruction well, take the correction well, and serve that job like we're serving God. And Paul even ends this section with some encouragement, because he says your work, it doesn't go unnoticed. It doesn't go unnoticed by God. I know we've probably all felt this place where, man, I've worked so hard and my boss has no idea what I just did. Doesn't get it. All I do is get criticized, doesn't understand me. But God sees it. God understands it. All right? Serve your job and your boss like you would serve God. It's noticed by God. That's what Paul's getting at. So employees, serve your job, serve your boss like you serve God. Respond to your boss like you're responding to God. Now let's talk to the bosses and the supervisors in the room. I don't know if any of you are, but if you are, he gives a little bit for you here. Verse 9. So Ephesians 6:9. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So we're talking to those in authority in the workplace, any level of supervisor, anybody with what they would say direct reports or people that work for you. He says treat your employees in the same way, because God's paying attention. Treat them well. Respect, kindness, patience. Now, it doesn't mean there's not any correction or instruction, just like parents to kids, but it's how you do it. All right? In that management role, you aren't to threaten your employees to get them to work harder, but correct them, give instruction. And it's not always easy to hear, but give that to them in a loving way, the way that maybe we would see God correcting and instructing us. Christ-like bosses would act in that same way. Instruct in a way that God would instruct. Correct in that same way. Because here's the thing. If we think about it, a lot of times, if you're a boss, you're a manager, anything, if the people underneath you do well, you probably do well, because they're helping you get to where you need to go. Take it as that team approach. You want them to do well. And also the big piece, God doesn't show favoritism, as Paul says. You know, someday when we're before God, if we get up there as employers and employees, whatever we were, God doesn't care who was the boss and who worked for who. Chris is sitting in the back. I actually worked for Chris for a while. Chris was my boss for a short time. And it was awesome. Chris was a great supervisor, and I think I was a reasonable employee to him. But the point is, I don't think God cares that Chris was my boss and that I worked for Chris. What he cares way more about is how we related in that relationship. I think that's way more what God cares about. Not which position you were in, but how you responded to those positions. So, are you a Christ-like employee? Are you a Christ-like employer? Are you responding to those positions like you're responding to God, whether you're an employee, an employer? So this week, as we kind of wrap this up, think about these relationships. Think about your relationships, specifically a relationship that there is an authority figure involved. Does that relationship as a whole reflect Christ? Are you reflecting Christ in that relationship? And if not, what needs to change? And when you think about those people specifically in authority, whether you're in authority or you're under somebody's, are you responding to that authority as if you're responding to God? So again, respond to authority as if we're responding to God. Let's pray. God, we thank you for these words from Paul again, God, as we look at more relationships, God, and this practical writing that Paul gives, even though he wrote it so long ago, God, how much we can still take from it today. So God, I pray that as we move forward with this week and the coming months, God, that we look at these relationships, whether it's parents and kids or in the workplace, God, that we would see authority and recognize it, but also respond to it well, God. Respond to it like we respond to you. So God, I pray that you would put those relationships on our hearts and just put any changes, any tweaks, whatever it is, God, on our hearts, on our minds to make in those so that we handle authority well, God.